Hello and welcome. In this presentation, we will discuss capacity, flexibility, and capacity location decisions. Now, to start the discussion, we can look at this product process matrix, which connects the type of processes with the type of products. Now, on the x-axis, we have products that range from standardized products that are made in high volume to products that are customized. They are one of a kind and made in low volume. So as we go from standardized products to customized products, we have high variety that's coming in. On the y-axis, we have processes, process technologies. And again, on the lower end towards the origin, we have flow shop. These are continuous flow, low flexibility kind of processes. And then as we go up in the y-axis, we have job shop, which has high flexibility. And the process technology is different. Now, when we think of this product process matrix, we know that there is a zone of alignment, which is the diagonal that we see here. So that's the spot where you would end up setting your products and process integration. So A and B are areas or places where it would make sense to have, for example, a job shop kind of process for customized solutions, or in the case of B, you would have a flow shop, a continuous flow for standardized products. Anything outside this zone of alignment would either be inefficient, like in this case, the area C, because you're trying to create standardized products using job shop sort of process technology. So it's inefficient. There's a high opportunity cost in doing so, or it will be infeasible, as we see in D, because here we are trying to build customized solutions using Flowshop, which is not possible. And that is why it's infeasible. So therefore, this is the sort of matrix which helps us understand how flexibility plays a role in capacity decisions. Now, capacity flexibility can be viewed from this multifaceted nature of flexibility. Flexibility could mean different things. It essentially measures the ability to adapt or change. So there could be mixed flexibility, which is the ability of a capacity to produce multiple types of products. This may refer to simultaneous production of different models on the same assembly line, or the ability to easily switch between one product to the other. That would be an example of flexibility, which many capacity might have. Volume flexibility is a different kind of flexibility, which is the ability of a capacity to increase or decrease the production rate of a particular product. Then you could have new product flexibility, which is the ability of a capacity to introduce new products into the operating system. Now, when we have these different measures for flexibility, we then want to also value that flexibility, how much it's going to help an organization. So there we will have to think of it in terms of scale economies. For some products, aggregating volumes is an important way in which you can value flexibility. So that will play a role in understanding which kind of capacity one should invest in. In other kinds of products, aggregating volatility would be very important. So here we are trying to pool the risk that might be there across different products, the uncertainty or the standard deviation across different products. They are to be pooled so that we can gain the benefits from flexibility. And finally, switching options, which is allocation and information updating, the ability to switch from a standardized capacity, for example, to a more flexible capacity, if that can be done so that we are combining the timing decision of when we will switch with the flexibility decision of whether to switch from standardized to flexible or vice versa. Those are also ways in which you can value the flexibility decisions. Now, moving on to capacity location decisions, and especially when we are thinking of it from strategic capacity decision, we need to think of it in terms of the role of a certain capacity. So on the x-axis, we can see we're asking what is the primary strategic reason for the location. It could be access to low-cost production, it could be access to skills and knowledge, or it could be access to market. On the y-axis, we are asking the question, what is the scope of its current activities and competencies? For some capacity or some locations, we might have a narrow or low scope, and for others, we might have a broad and high scope of activities in them. Based on those two measures, we can now categorize locations and the plant or warehouse or whatever capacity we might have into these 6 types. We could have an offshore plant which produces specific items at low cost and they then exports for further work or for sale. So as you can see, this particular offshore plant is one where we are having access to low cost production and the scope of activity is narrow and low. So you don't have too much authority in terms of making decisions of different types, process or product related decisions, and not too much of investments happen in these kinds of plants. Then on the other end, the extreme end here would be contributor plant, which is where you have access to market. So you are closer to the market, and that's why you have set up a plant there. And the scope of activities and competencies are high. So this is the kind of plant which serves specific regional market, but competes with other plants in the network for new processes or products. So it has some ability to create its own processes and products, and that's something which is the other end of it. Now, within access to market, we are noticing that we can have contributor plant, which is with high competency, high scope of activities, and it is access to the market as the main criteria, or server plant, where we keep the scope of activities and competencies low. So the objective here is more of serving specific regional market to overcome tariffs, taxes, etc. So we are not really looking at developing new products or processes, but it's meant for a strategic reason to be in a market where we are selling. Likewise, in the case of access to low-cost production, offshore plant, which has low competencies and low scope of activities, uh, can also be expanded eventually, perhaps, or sometimes you actually straight away set up a plant which we call a source plant, which has high competencies and high scope of activities. And the key objective still is to access low-cost production. So here we are producing at low cost, but with the same ability as best plant in the network of that organization, of the organization which is setting up this plant. So that particular plant, the source plant, now has authority over production, has authority over procurement, planning, logistics, etc. In between, we see there is a very different primary strategic reason in this case, which is to access skills and knowledge within a particular place. You're investing in a capacity to gain that knowledge and skills. And here we can think of it in terms of outpost plants or lead plants. Outpost plants are the ones which have low scope of activities and low competencies. But the reason we have it here in that location is because of the ability to gain skills and knowledge. So we're collecting information from advanced suppliers, competitors, research labs, or customers in that location. And then we could use it as a secondary role of offshore or server. So it could be either offshore or server as a secondary role, but the primary role is to collect information. And lead plant, again, the reason is to access skills and knowledge. Um, and there we are looking at broad set of activities and competencies. So these are plants where it's a global hub for product and process knowledge and innovation. And there's full authority over all activities. So they are able to tap into local skills and knowledge to initiate company-wide innovation because they're gaining knowledge and innovation from the location where it's set up, but also they have the ability to incorporate some of that within the organization, within that plant. And macroeconomic and non-market factors also need to be kept in mind. For example, the risk involved, monetary or political, intellectual property, strategic flexibility, etc. But to think of it in the form of protection, the tariffs, quotas, we already saw that in the case of server plant. And then corporate social responsibility, soft factors like attractiveness to live for employees. All these are also important considerations in capacity location decisions. Now, thinking of strategy and implementation in location decisions, mainly from the point of view, let's say, of thinking of capacity of a supplier that we want to tap into. We are aware of this dual sourcing approach where we have a strategy of dual sourcing, and the tactic is to get certain quantity of products from one location, location A, and the remaining from location B. And it could be from a supplier, it could be your own facility from where you're trying to source products to a certain market, but you have two different locations. So we have to think of it in terms of the quantities that we will be ordering from these locations, and then inventory level, the safety stock that we will carry. So that would be an example of a strategy called dual sourcing. And then the other strategy, the contrasting strategy, is that of a single sourcing, and we could choose location A or location B. Right? So when we use single sourcing strategy, we are just ordering quantities from one location, and there are inventory levels that we set up, which is a safety stock. Now, how do we determine if we were to go with dual sourcing, how much of the quantity should we order from location A and how much should we order from location B? So here's one approach that can be adopted, which is what we call tailored dual sourcing or a base surge policy. What you do here is allocate base demand, the demand that you have, you set a base demand that exists for that product, and that is allocated to location A. So you source this constant quantity per period from location A, where let's assume that location A is relatively cheaper place to produce that product than location B. So you are looking at getting the base demand covered from that cheaper location so that it allows location A to minimize variations and maximize efficiency. So it's working on its strength of cost. Location B is meant to fill surge demand. So here we are taking advantage from proximity, which then allows for responsiveness. So location B is expensive, but it is closer to the market where we are sourcing to. And hence we are taking advantage of that proximity and responsiveness. And that location is meant for surge demand, which will be filled from there. So this is an approach that can be used for planning for dual sourcing. But the question that comes then is, what is that right base demand? This base demand that we see, how do we determine what that base demand is so that we can then allocate it to location A? Now, there is a way in which we can calculate that base demand or set that base demand by using a base allocation information and then multiplying it with average demand. Now, base allocation, which is the fraction that we are going to source from the location which is cheaper, the capacity of the place where it is located, that place is cheaper. That base allocation formula is approximately 1 minus sigma, and sigma stands for the standard deviation of demand per period, multiplied by square root of h, which is the holding cost per unit per period, divided by 2 times mu, which stands for the average demand per period, multiplied by delta C. The delta C stands for location A's sourcing cost advantage per unit, which is basically location B's cost minus location A's cost. So that difference in cost is what you're trying to incorporate here. So this gives you offshored fraction, so percentage of your demand that you will be sourcing from the cheaper location. And then the remaining surge demand you will be sourcing from the responsive location, which is relatively more expensive. Now, this number that you get, this percentage value that you get, fraction that you get, is basically a starting point. It's a reasonable approximation, a starting point for a more refined analysis that can then capture other factors, macroeconomic risk, and other factors that at this point in time are not being considered in this expression. But at least it gives you a good starting point to think about other things and then incorporate them to come up with the final decision. So by this, now we have with this discussion some understanding of capacity flexibility and some understanding of the location decisions, which are very important when we are thinking of long-term strategy for capacity. Thank you.